Everyone, and welcome back to the RedBeard Outdoors podcast. I've got an outstanding guest here. We've got Ike Eastman, who is the owner and president of Eastman's Publishing. And there's tons of things we're going to get into today, guys. Lots of interesting topics about wildlife, hunting, things along those lines. But before we get into that, Ike, who are you for people that maybe don't know who you are, but do know Eastman's?
Yeah. So I'm third generation in the outdoor industry. My grandfather was Gordon Eastman. My father was Mike Eastman. Grandfather started filming in the outdoors in 1957. He was filming in Alaska and bringing the films down and live narrating them. I often get people saying, "Oh man, I watched your grandpa's stuff when I was a little kid." And these are 7-year-old men. When I was a little kid, my dad took us to the high school auditorium and it was packed. And then they took those films, and he got into theatricals and did some stuff in Northwest Territories where he built a film for the Canadian government when they were trying to figure out if it was viable to hunt it. And that was called Challenging the Northwest Territories. And so he built that and a bunch of other theatrical films, and he took them through theaters. That's what that means, movie theaters. Then in the 80s, they took those films and put them on VHS tape. And back in the day, there used to be, even before Blockbuster, every little community had a video rental store, and you'd go down there on a Friday night, and for $5, you'd rent a movie, and you had to watch it and return it by 10 the next morning, and Be Kind and Rewind and all that stuff. And so they took all those old films. I think there was 13 of them. And he took all those films. I look over there because the poster's on the wall over there. He took 13 of them and did that with them, and sold them to all over the country. So I also get guys that are in their 40s going, "Man, we used to go down there and we couldn't wait for the next one to come out, and we'd rent it and wear it out before we had to turn it back." And so he did that. Now, my dad was obviously grew up with my grandfather, drug along with him. And he has this famous saying about that. He didn't know that other people didn't spend all summer in a sleeping bag filming stuff. He thought that was what everybody did until he got into the military, and he's a Vietnam vet, and realized that this isn't what everybody did. This is, being able to sleep in a sleeping bag every night was not something everyone did. So, and then he came back from Vietnam, and in the 70s he was an outfitter. And then in the 80s, my grandfather needed some help selling these videos because they had to physically go to every one of these little towns and walk into the shop and open up a case and sell them. And so my dad helped him do that. He's been in every single little town everywhere, especially on the East Coast and down south, where those guys really loved and hadn't, this is all before Outdoor Channel and even TNN and all the stuff they were starting to put hunting on. This was before that. And so the only way you got hunting or wildlife content is you put on VHS and watch it. And so he started that when he was in Harrisburg, which is today it's still one of the largest outdoor shows in the world. And he was sitting in a booth peddling VHS tapes, and people from Pennsylvania and in the surrounding areas kept asking him, "So you're from out west? How do you hunt out there? We hear that there's I really want to shoot an elk. That's on my priority, bucket list." And he got tired of answering the same question over and over again. So he kind of made a frequently asked questions sheet. And it was, yes, you can hunt out west. Yes, there's X amount of public land. Yes, elk is a doable thing. And yes, you put a 4-year plan and shoot an antelope and a mule deer, then go after elk, kind of thing. And he would hand those out because the people would just clog up his booth asking him questions and no one buying anything. It's a little hard to pay for dinner when that happens. So he built this frequently asked questions that turned into a pamphlet, that turned into a magazine, and today is our flagship. That's Eastman's Hunting Journals. And he was able to take that and then build the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal magazine on top of it, and then put the Outdoor Channel TV show on top of that. And it was running really good, and we had lots of subscribers, have lots of subscribers and lots of really good partners in the industry. And then he turned 62, I think, or 63. And he basically walked into my office, and my brother was involved in the company, and still is to a fair amount, but he was involved in the company. He walked in and said, I don't want to do this. I want to retire. I don't, I want to, he said, I want to, on the next chapter of my life, we had built a really nice cabin about, a stone's throw away from the wilderness here in the Beartooth. And he said, your mother and I want to move up there, and we want to, live all year, 220 inches of snow. It's okay. We, kind of move back to what they grew up in, is that type of environment. And so he said, I'm going to either sell it or you guys can figure out how to buy it from me, but I need this amount of money for it in order to retire. And so I put a plan together. So let me back up a little bit. I was a banker. I went to college and got a degree in finance and marketing. And I was working I was a credit analyst for First Interstate Bank. And we did mostly ag loans where I was humming along, going to be the next president of one of their areas, and humming right along. Life was pretty good. And my parents came to me and said, listen, we both just have high school educations, and this is in 2003. We need some help. This thing's growing to the point where it's beyond our understanding, and we need to, secure financing and all of this stuff. And I said, well, how do you tell your parents no, right? And you're like, well,
Right.
that company is pretty much my little brother. It was started when I was 10. So, okay, I'll come back and we'll figure this out. And so I came back and I was running the operations. My brother was running the creative side of it, and the content and building the articles and the magazines and TV shows and all that stuff. And I was running the sales department and marketing and finance and all of the other things. And it was clipping right along until 2008 or 2007, when my dad said, I'm done. You guys figure this out. And so I put together a plan, went to some banks and secured the financing and bought it from my parents. And, and then in 2010, I started our digital division. We kind of went through that 2010 bubble pop, and everybody's going, digital media is the new thing, and YouTube and whatever else that meant back then, and traditional media is dead. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to pivot again. And so we did, and started the YouTube channel, which has, I don't know, 250,000 subscribers on it, and I think it's 180 million views or some ridiculous thing. We started our e-news, which is a newsletter we send out with not only hunting content, but also gear reviews, hot topics like whatever's happening, corner crossing or predators or whatever. So we send that out once a week. And then we started in 2000, I think it was 16 or 17. We started the podcasts, and now we have 6 podcasts. Brian Barney does our Eastman's Elevated. I have a Predator Pros podcast, Eastman's Predator Pros. We have Western Huntsman, which is kind of more political. It's hunting, but he really tackles the political side of stuff. Constantly telling people that he really wants to sit down and interview there's a gal that is an extremist trying to protect the wolves. He's like, I really want to sit down and interview. Well, good luck with that. Then there's my podcast, which is Eastman's Hunting Journal podcast. And I talk to interesting folks. I just did one with Aaron Watson, and he's a hunter, and he's unique because he's never signed with a label. He's been, singing country and singing in honky tonks for 25 years and is really good awesome at it. Hell of an entertainer. So him and Glenn Eberly from Eberly Stock, who's an Olympian and a former U.S. Air Force pilot, just interesting people getting their perspective on life and what life really means, as well as, great stories from their life. And so, there's and then we started Eastman's Bow Hunting podcast, where Dan Picard and Brian Barney sit down and they really go into real depth on strategies and equipment. I mean, they're going to sit down and have a whole podcast on Weight Forward and what it means and why. Why should I care? That type of stuff. So, and then we have, I got convinced by my managing editor, Todd Helms, to start a wingman division, and that's all wing shooting. So it's upland birds, it's a waterfowl, it's turkeys, you name it. If it's got wings, doves, you name it. If it's got wings, Todd wants to hunt it. And it's been wild how many guys wing hunt, because there's nothing else to do in the winter, right? But that January, February, March times is is pretty boring. So if you can go December, January, and part of February, or all of February, and wing hunt, and then parlay that with snow geese all the way into the spring, I mean, it gets you out in the field and shooting and doing the outdoor life thing. So he has a podcast, it's Wingman Podcast. He also has a TV online series, and he also does a blog type newsletter as well. It's all cool stuff. And he just launched, or he's about to launch in September, a documentary on sage grouse. And this is a topic that I've been really worried about for the last 5 years, because sage grouse is kind of the canary of our wildlife and of our ecosystem out west. And if they put those on the endangered species list, it will shut down. And I can't remember the acreage, but it's like 33 million acres of 33 million acres of public land that you won't be able to access. And it's
Wow.
huge. When you see the map, I mean, it's better part of northern Utah, better part of southern Idaho, all of Wyoming, parts of Montana, Colorado, even into the Dakotas. It's a huge area. And if they shut that down because they're on the endangered species list, all that recreating's gone. No more biking, no more off-roading, no more, you name it, fishing, no more of that. And so we dive into the complexity of sage grouse and why they're such, what's happening to them, what's being done to help them. And it's a really, really interesting documentary. So if you're a hunter or a fisherman or an outdoor person, take a look at that. It'll be, we're launching it at the end of September. It'll be on the Outdoor Channel. It'll be on everywhere you get it, YouTube, everything. So
with that, just real quick, I didn't realize that they were even close to that, because here it's pretty much like from what I understand, there's not really a limit during certain months on sage grouse in Utah.
So there is, what they did is they shortened the season way down. So it's usually like in Wyoming, we used to have a whole month of September hunt them. Now it's 2 weeks. And now just recently, the last couple of years, they put limits on them. So you can only have, I believe in Wyoming, you can only have 4 birds in your possession.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. It's like two a day or 4. So I don't know, but
yeah, it's 2 a day and 4 total.
Yeah.
And
okay.
interestingly enough, Jonathan, is they found that hunting's not the problem. It's habitat, of course, right? Because we're not taking enough birds out of the system to really dent the system. What's really happening is habitat and predators. Ravens are just absolute hell on them when they're nesting, and they'll go in and decimate, a whole group of sage grouse nests.
Wow.
Because they can hover over them and fly over them and, find a nest and then eat every egg. So it's really interesting. It's very, very complex. It's not one thing, it's a bunch. And it's interesting, the industries that have come together to try and help the habitat and change, the oil and gas industry. They really stepped it up, knowing that if those birds get on there, their leases are done, and which is going to affect the economies. It's going to affect, the pump price, all that stuff. And so they've developed systems and mitigation banks and stuff to help make sure that doesn't happen. And they're really stepping up, spending more money than anybody. Well, I shouldn't say that. Recently, the U.S. government just they allocated billions of dollars for habitat restoration.
Wow.
So it's good, but it's very complex.
Yeah, no, sounds like that's interesting. I never even thought. I just know that they're the bird that whenever I can't find an elk and I end up finding that's what I end up shooting. So,
those could be mountain grouse, which are different.
Yeah.
Sage grouse are the ones that, they're when they're on their leks, they bubble up and they make the funny noise with their big chest.
Well, it sounds like a heartbeat, almost like the heartbeat of the mountain is kind of what I've referred to it as, just because it is interesting, because we were up in Idaho this past spring, and we were out there looking for bears. Of course, that's when we saw all the elk. We saw everything else go, but we couldn't find a bear. We found everything else though, and it turned out it was grizzly country anyway. So I hadn't scouted that very well. But anyway, long story short, we would get out of the truck to glass some hillsides, and I kept hearing that low. I mean, it's all I can describe it as is like a heartbeat. Or it sounds like maybe an amp that someone's, tapping on a microphone or something. Right. But it's like, it resonates. It's crazy how far that sound travels. And anyway, it's pretty cool. Sage grouse are awesome, except for, again, when you're walking out at night, you haven't seen an elk all day, and they decide to spook you by jumping out of the trees and just like take it off, in an explosion. But yeah, they're awesome birds for sure. So I'll have to look into that, because I had no idea they were even close to being on the endangered list.
Yeah, they about 10 years ago, they almost put them on the list. And Wyoming, which was the first state to do it, stepped it up. Our Governor Meade, stepped it up with a mitigation task force, and within months, within one season, turned around. They were falling off really fast. Good thing is, sage grouse, if you do a few things, it helps significantly, and they were able to do some stuff, protect some areas, and they were able to bring it back, or up, at least on the upswing of the thing. But it was really, really close. I think it went, if I remember right, it went all the way to the top. One of the ladies that we interviewed, who is been part of, I think she said 4 or 5 listings of species, she said the only reason it didn't get listed was time. And if they had more, if it would have been fast tracked, they would have got listed. And as we all know, from bears and wolves and everything else, it is almost impossible to get them off the list once they get there. It really is.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I just looked it up real quick. So I guess I'm referring to mountain grouse is what I've shot. So yeah, I didn't realize there was that big of a difference. But no, I see it now. That makes sense. So yeah, that's cool. That's really good information, especially for people out there looking to get involved in something, and realizing how big of an impact that one bird can have on elk hunting, deer hunting, recreation, fishing, all of those things, just to protect that one bird. So, I imagine mountain grouse aren't, because I see them everywhere.
So they're
probably
not. I
not
don't
even
think
close.
they're anywhere close to being on the list. It's the sage grouse.
Yeah, okay. So that makes a lot more sense then, because I was like, there's no way these are endangered. I'll take pictures just during my couple weeks out in the woods and show them like they're everywhere.
I'm not sure there is a limit on those, especially if you consume them in the field, which that's one of my favorite things during elk hunting is take the blunt out and pop a sage grouse and have fresh meat that night.
Exactly, man. It was so good this last season when I popped a couple of them. Again, I was frustrated because I had gotten close on an elk, didn't happen. So I'm like, I'm walking out, and it was like just barely light. And of course, this thing runs across my path. I pull my bow out and pop them, and I bring them back and have some noodles with some fresh sage grouse, or I guess grouse,
mountain grouse
meat. And man, that was delicious. So yeah. I'll definitely have to keep an eye out on that. But no, that's really good information. And I personally have looked for a lot of ways to get more into conservation and actually taking action. And then of course using the podcast to get this information out there. So that's definitely really good for people to look into. I'm not much of a wing hunter, to be honest with you. I usually use the winter time to go sledding with the kids, and just kind of take a break from hunting so my wife doesn't divorce me. But
so she allows you to do it next fall.
Right, exactly. And I mentioned going spring bear hunting this year for the first time, and she was like, oh, so this is becoming a year-round thing now. Okay.
I just turned and go, shopping a year-round thing? I'm just asking for a friend.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is I'm the spender in the family too. So But yeah, so with that being said, as far as that that documentary, we'll definitely have to drop a link whenever that comes out, and make sure that people go watch that, because that'll be good information. I do want to hit on, so the corner crossings too is a thing that last year when I was up in Wyoming, I took my kids up, and it was I kind of take antelope or pronghorn, whatever people want to call him, as almost an easier introductory hunt, because they're 100%. Everywhere in Wyoming, and we were north of Evanston, so they were they were just, it was like rats. They were all over the place, and so I took my sons up, and I was able to leave them in the truck, and I had to wait for the herd. I got about 200 or whatever yards off the road. It was like a dirt road, and then waited for the herd to get into the actual square that was public land. And the boys were able to stay warm. It was freezing out there. They were able to stay warm, pull up the binoculars, watch the shot, go out and help me clean it. But it's interesting, this corner crossing thing, and I kind of want to hear your opinion on it, because My personal opinion is it seems a little silly to not allow people to corner cross. I understand private property. I get that. I respect that. But getting from one spot to another when they literally can't, they're property locked. Just doesn't make sense to me. But I mean, you know more about it. You live there, so what's I guess your take on it?
So, interestingly enough, I'll just give you a little back story. Corner crossing has been a subject for a long time. If you've lived in Montana for longer than 10 years, they were fighting it 10 years ago. And honestly, the law enforcement just kind of turned a blind eye to them doing it, because in Montana, people have been doing it for years.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that's unique is, for instance, if you're in North Dakota, it has so many yards from that section line is public access. So you can walk down the section lines to access. You can't, get out of that easement, but you can walk down every section line to get into public land. Wyoming has always been very, very, I guess, it was never legal to corner cross. Wyoming was started by ranchers, and currently the majority of our legislature, state legislature, is still in the ag industry. They kind of developed it that way. They have to be there January through March, 40 straight days, and no one can take that much time off unless you have nothing else to do in the winter. And so they kind of stack the deck that way. So they've been very, very strict on the corner crossing, I would say. Now, so that's one of the reasons why there was organizations that threw money to help defend these guys by crossing. They've been corner crossing. They took it through the court system. They took it through the court system and made it to where that they didn't prosecute these guys for it. Now, that does not make it legal. That just means that that one case, they didn't prosecute them. It doesn't mean that everybody can come to Wyoming and corner cross, because they can still get tickets for it, because they haven't set that as a precedent one way or another. It has to go through the legislation for it. Number two, so then the rancher decided that he was going to sue them on the I'm escaping the words. Civil side. Yeah. And they lost that as well. And the judge actually made a statement. The reason you lost this is because the way you have acted, basically. The case was horrible. In my opinion, what the ranch manager and the rancher did, which the rancher doesn't live on the ranch. He is a ranch manager that he behaved poorly on this. In my opinion, from what I read in the documents, he really did. And I watched the video. He really performed extremely poorly. Tried to buffalo these guys that the whole thing was his. I also think that this is a slippery slope. I think one of our top 10 rights in the U.S. is land ownership, and it's what differentiated us from Europe. It's one of the things that the founding fathers were very adamant on, is that we own the land. The government can't just take it over. It has to go through a process. Because if you remember, when they came over here, that's what was happening in Europe. They were getting prosecuted, and the king just came in and took all your land, all your farmland, and you were stuck there with nothing, or being, a slave to him. So I think it's a very slippery slope. Not that I don't agree, because I do agree that just crossing a chunk, crossing a pin that's set in the ground from one corner to another corner has zero impact on the ground that you're not touching. Zero impact. So here's, and I'm trying to catch my words, because I know I get beat up a lot about this.
Yeah.
Because I don't want, as a property owner in Wyoming, I don't want my neighbors doing it to me. And because it's never just crossing a pin. pretty soon they're hunting on you and taking your game and then dragging it across a corner and going, no, it was on the public land. And you know how, unfortunately, guys, humans, we give an inch and then we take 45 miles. That's just how we work, right? And so I can see where that slippery slope can start. I also see where the Pandora's box can start. It could go the other way. It could go that the legislators say, no, not only can you not cross the corners, but you have to stay 60 feet away from all the edges or some crazy thing, because they have the power to do that. If they didn't, in North Dakota, they wouldn't have went the other way. That 60 feet, or I don't know exactly what it is, but there's an easement down that section line. So if they can do an easement down the section line, our state could say there's no easement. In fact, every section line, there's 60 feet of that you have to keep away from. So that's, and nobody wants that, because that'll create rebounderings and all kinds of a mess, in my opinion. So I'm hoping that our legislatures do what's right and do what they were voted for and get it into a very, very, and they won't, because this is not how legislatures work, but I hope they get it into a writing that is very easy for law enforcement to determine what the law is, and then guys stick to that law. I'm not saying it's one way or the other. I'm just saying I hope those guys do what needs to be done and make it so that there's no question. There's no question. Law enforcement doesn't have a question. The judges don't have a question. And me as a hunter, I don't have a question.
Yeah.
And Wyoming's unique because it is more checkerboarded than most states. I mean, you go to southern Wyoming and it's every other section is public. The other sections are owned by the railroad. Okay. Is the railroad have the right to keep you off? Legally, yes, they do. And then you can't cross. So, I mean, it's very complicated. It's very complicated, and I hope that they do it correctly. Now, like I mentioned, Wyoming's one. You've got a ton of states that need. Nevada is very similar. Montana is very similar. Montana may have a bigger problem because they aren't as checkerboarded, which means there's one corner that they could open up huge chunks of public land that have yet to be opened. I'm not convinced it's going to go very far, because the landowners now in the West typically are your very, very wealthy individuals. And I'm not talking just conservatives that are wealthy. I'm talking there's a lot of people on the other side of that realm that are extremely wealthy and trying to protect their property. And I don't think the legislatures will have a choice. But there's a long answer to a very complex question.
No, yeah, and that definitely makes sense. I just when you say it that way, that makes sense. I guess I'm just coming from the perspective of a guy that's got good intentions. And I can also see where there's those negative or bad examples, bad apples of hunters that would take it and run the other way, which is awful, because, from my perspective, I'm like, I'm not a landowner up there. So, what I own is public land, and I can't get to my public land because I can't get to this corner. And, respecting that, I'll respect it, but it doesn't mean that I'm not frustrated by it,
Yeah.
And then I didn't even realize, I haven't even honestly looked a lot in Montana. As of right now, I'm trying to keep it to one out-of-state hunt per year. But when I do get there, I'm sure, you're mentioning that there's areas that you can get into bigger chunks of public, but you have to go through, the private. Now, I guess, I mean, it's not as hard as long as you're able to get a hold of the public or the private landowner, you're able to, cross, right? I mean, is that basically what it boils down to? You just have to put a few extra steps in.
Well, Montana's very complex because those guys bought those chunks of property on purpose because they surround it, it's just acreage. So if you buy 10,000 or 20,000 acres and there's a 20,000 acre of public chunk in the middle of it, now guess what? You have a 40,000 acre ranch because you just leased that for not much. And, it becomes a big place. The other complexity of this, and we haven't even really talked about this, is there are states that when you lease the public land, the state land, for instance, you lease the state land, you get grazing and hunting and recreating as part of your lease. And so they can keep you out of that. Wyoming is not that way. Wyoming is you get grazing leases and they don't lease any of the other stuff, but you get the grazing rights. So, I mean, it adds another level of complexity when a guy, gets the lease of the public land and gets all the other amenities. But Montana does have, there's some chunks of property where if you could corner cross or have, a 10-foot access from a county road 10 feet in, and then it opens up, 20, 30, 40,000 acre chunks of public land. That's a huge thing. Here's what I say to people, and they go, well, okay, what can we do? Well, number one, let your legislators know which direction you want in whatever state that is. Now, coming from, like you're saying, well, I'm out of state, that doesn't help. That's true. But just letting them know, even though you're out of state, they will go, well, if there's guys from Utah, there's probably guys from Wyoming that think the same way, especially if they hear a couple guys from Wyoming say the exact same thing. The other thing you can do, and this is really something that people don't think of much, look at some of these nonprofit organizations, and I'm going to use Elk Foundation as an example, but they all do this. Elk Foundation, I'm going to use them as an example because I know it very intimately. I'm not on the board or anything, but I know them intimately because I'm following them on a couple chunks of property. They are really, really good and have the means to go in. There's a Maui River in Oregon. They just bought this huge chunk of property from a timber company that opened up the whole Eagle Cap wilderness. I think it's 20,000 acre chunk, or maybe it was 20,000 acre chunks, but they're going to make it, and they donated it back to the state for state property with some obviously conservation stuff on it, and a few stipulations like don't let them do this kind of stuff. But it's going to open up that entire west side of the Eagle Cap wilderness to public land so that you can access it. So you can, it's not a 7-hour horseback ride to get back in there. It's a 2-hour horseback ride. You can actually hike, you can actually fish the river and steelhead fish that river. That hasn't been, they haven't been able to do that ever, because the Elk Foundation is doing it for the right reasons, which means they're opening it up for the common hunter, the common recreator. There's a chunk of property in Montana that the landowner got really tired of the Forest Service not maintaining the easement that he gave them, and basically said, I'm revoking the easement. I have the opportunity to revoke this if you abandon it, and I'm calling it abandoned, which then shut down a big chunk of public land. Well, the Elk Foundation stepped in there and said, whoa, what? Let's sit down at a table and just have a conversation. And so they sat down at a table with the powers that be of the Forest Service, the landowner, and RMF, and they worked out a deal that RMF would help maintain that access. And it's only like 4 miles of road, of a 2-track road, but it was timbered, fallen in on it, and nobody had maintained it, and the Forest Service was trying to abandon it because they didn't want to maintain it. And the Elk Foundation goes, there's a ton of hunting in this. There's a ton of elk, behavior. This needs to be maintained. And so they ponied up the money to do it. Other organizations just decided to sue the Forest Service. That there is a time and place for that. I'm not going to lie.
Do they have a 20-year-old running their like it just that when I hear that, I'm like, man, there's so many things that could be solved by a simple communication, and not even just emails, but a phone call, a sit down meeting, even just a virtual meeting, but face-to-face communication versus we're going to sue you. Like that kind of crap. It's like going to, when you're in a 9-to-5 and someone goes over your boss and goes to that boss to get you in trouble. It's like, why don't you just tell me you didn't like XYZ thing that I was doing? I would have figured it out. Like it just,
I'm not unreasonable.
That's terrible. But
so I guess the point is get involved in some of these organizations and donate some money and know your regional guy and voice your concerns, show up to the banquets. And and there are organizations that are doing it the right way and helping the access problems, and helping, there's big chunks being purchased for that very thing. There's habitats being helped on that. You don't have to have money. You don't have to donate money. You can put boots on the ground and go plant 7,000 pieces of sagebrush for the Mule Deer Foundation in these migration corridors that are struggling. You can go do, boots on the ground means a lot. And those guys struggle with that. That's probably their number one struggle, because there's always rich guys that are looking for a tax break to donate money to buy a chunk of property. But there's not a lot of guys that'll, burn 2 Saturdays or 2 Saturdays and a Sunday to make sure that the fences all have a top rail on them, so that crossing in the winter isn't detrimental to 5,000 deer, that type of stuff.
So I just want to ask, while we're on this subject, what are some, you've brought up Elk Foundation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and then what are some other organizations out there that you would recommend that actually put action behind their words and don't just suck up your money and then turn around and sue things? Like, they actually go out and do have these sit down conversations, make it more personable, and get things done rather than just talk and take your money.
That's a good question. And I hope I don't miss anybody here, so because I wasn't prepped for this, but I'll name some and why. Mule Deer Foundation does a really good job. The National Mule Deer Foundation does a really good job of habitat. That is their thing. They really don't deal with the access stuff. They've determined that habitat is the number one concern, or number one thing that how we can affect mule deer populations, and so they spend the majority of their time in habitat. If you're looking for, so then there's some that do advocacy. I know this sounds weird, but bear with me for a second. Safari Club International, which I'm a life member of, because they are really good at rubbing elbows with the right people to make sure that hunters still can hunt. And it's not just safaris. That is a very small portion of what they do. They're really, really entrenched in North American stuff and being able to hunt in, the U.S. and being the voice of the hunter in the U.S. to help them maintain being a hunter. Dallas Safari Club. Now, they're a unique one. I am always reluctant to call them Dallas Safari Club. I started calling them DSC because they are bigger than just Dallas. They were started in Dallas, but now they're all over. There's chapters here in Wyoming. There's a chapter in Utah, Montana, and they have a very unique, the way that they do their books is really unique. 75% of the money that is raised at our Wyoming banquet here stays in Wyoming. Then there's 10% that goes to an advocacy that talks about hunters' rights. And then there's a very small portion of that goes into the administration that on the national level, and they are very good at keeping that. In fact, a lot of times they don't take it because they'll get donors that donate money and resources to the administration, so they don't have to pull out of the general funds. That's a really unique organization, and they do a ton for North America, and they do a ton of hunter advocacy, people in Washington making sure that you and I's rights are being represented, and you and I's interest as hunters being represented in these big conversations about, endangered species or gun control or, hunting rights, period. They do a really good job. The Theodore Roosevelt Partnership, TRCP, they do a really good job. They are probably the most well-connected of the groups as far as lobbyist type stuff in Washington. They do a really good job. I know I'm missing 5 or 6. If you're into waterfowl, I know that that Delta waterfowl is really, really good. Ducks Unlimited is huge. They do a lot of stuff, but they do really good things. The Shooting Sports Foundation, NSSF, they do awesome stuff for gun rights. They are not connected to the NRA. People think they're the same. They're not. They're an organization that, they're the ones that are keeping shooting in the schools. They're the ones that are actually fighting the fight to make sure that our gun rights, our number 2 amendment, is not getting stepped on. I know I'm forgetting some here.
Have you heard of Howl?
Yes. So
Okay.
they're a unique organization because they are in a really, they're really, really good, and they will at some point be the other way, but they're really, really good at informing us of what's going on and keeping us up to date on what's going on, and then giving us the tools to contact the right people to, hey, this is,
Mhm.
we're not accepting this. I'm your constituent and this is unacceptable. I need you to fix it. They are really good. They're starting.
What?
If I remember it, they were started out of California, and it was all about the black bear. And then then they got into mountain lions. I might have that backwards. It might have been mountain lions and then black bear, but they they're a good information source for sure. If you aren't subscribed to them, subscribe to them, because then you'll get all the information from all the states, not just California, but from every state, everything that's going on nationally, to keep you informed, and to see how this, to connect the dots and see how this game is really being played.
Yeah, and what I like about them too is, like you said, they provides the tools so you can still act. Because there's some people, like you said, that don't really have the time or the money to burn necessarily to go out and either donate or to spend those 2 Saturdays and a Sunday, because they want to be with their family. And so, and you can turn it into a family activity for sure. But
Yep.
Hal does an awesome job with. They have some whatever their algorithm, and that's just what I call it because I don't know what it's technically called, but a way to get to where your emails are not put in a spam folder somewhere.
Yes.
They actually get to the people that you're trying to contact. And so they kind of do the legwork for you, and all you have to do is go in and make sure you let them know. Let your representatives know. So yeah, they're definitely an awesome one. I know they're pretty new, but they're doing a really good job. And then I'm trying to think, Blood Origins. Do you know much about them?
I know Robert pretty well. That's a great organization that, that each one of these has a unique thing, like how a very unique thing. And so what you're interested in, is unique in what's important to you may not be as important to me, and what's important to me may not be as important to you. And Blood Origins does a really good job. Oregon Hunters Association, they do a great job in Oregon, and that state really needs some help. They're fighting, they're fighting a rough one over there.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And that's why I wanted, and obviously we didn't name everyone, right? So I don't want to think, I don't want people to think that this is the only list, but I love that you mentioned it. See, we've hit on mule deer, elk, how, like, there's different organizations that people can pick and choose. I just recommend, and I'll leave kind of a list of them down here in the description of the podcast so people can go check them out for themselves and see how they can get involved. And you can pick and choose how you want to get involved. Don't feel like you have to do all of them, but find ways that you can be active in conservation, because it is slowly being eroded, especially on the West Coast with California, Oregon, and Washington's another big one right now too, that is just completely destroying, conservation as far as hunting's concerned.
The other one I want to mention is the sheep. I'm just going through the Sheep Foundation. I know not everybody's a sheep hunter, but you have to understand that species is really, really delicate in our ecosystem. And for what they're doing with sheep, it cascades down and affects other species, including deer, including elk. And they do a really good job. And you know what? The sheep show that's in Reno is one of my favorite shows. It's real small, but it is like a tight knit family and a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I've actually had both the husband and wife on the podcast previously. I should probably get him back on, but yeah, it was interesting. He almost got the bug of sheep hunting into me because just the way he talks about sheep, and it was interesting that these hardened animals have such a weak immune system when it comes to certain things, that they can't be introduced to species of, whether it be a certain animal or whatever. You drop one little bit of some disease in there and they just get wiped out. It's crazy. So that's definitely another one to look into for sure.
Gray does good. He does really good over there. Has done really good, especially with young people, trying to, he calls it the less than one club. It's all of us that never killed a sheep.
Exactly. Exactly. So awesome. I do want to bring up a couple of things here. So with, while we're talking about conservation here, obviously your family has been in it for multiple generations at this point. But let's talk about Wyoming and what's going on with the deer population there. And you gave up your hunt this year in Wyoming for mule deer for a reason. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So Wyoming, we started the winter. Well, the last few winters have been really good as far as for wildlife, and our one of the reasons is because our November and Decembers were really, really mild, and so it allowed those bucks and does to come out of the rut, recoup for a month or two before they hit the bad winter, the bad portions of the winter. Typically it's January, February, March, and then into April. This year we did get a mild December in January, or November and December, but then January hit and it was pretty bad, and then February continued to be bad, and then March was unbelievable. And so what happens in Wyoming, there's 40,000 head of mule deer that live in the Wyoming, the red desert. They migrate and they winter in the red desert. And so that species is really, really, or that area, that herd is really, really kept track of. And that's where they started collaring these deer and finding out they were migrating 300 miles and all this stuff. It's also very intricate, and what happens there is happening other places. What happened in February and March, is we would get warm ups into the 40s. And so the top of the snow would start melting. And then a week later, it would get 10 below zero or 26 below zero. And it would freeze that top, and it makes a crust. So you can imagine, walking across your yard with a crust of snow, and we call it post holing. And you just, you break through that 3-4 inches of snow, and then it's just sugar underneath. Deer can handle really cold weather. They can handle the 30 below as long as they get, as long as they have access to food, and they'll eat all day and most of the night. And they just have to keep that fire stoked. And they can handle snow, but they can't handle both. And they definitely can't handle it when it crusts over like that, because once it crusts over, then they have to dig in the snow to find the food. And so the amount of calories that they're taking in is less than what it took to get to that food through the crust. So it's just, it's just positives and negatives, calories in versus calories out.
Mm-hmm.
They reported that Wyoming Game and Fish reported that out of that herd, 80% of our deer, not just 80% of our fawns or 80% of our bucks or 80% of the does, but 80% of the population, and they think it may be more than this, was killed during this last winter. So I hunt down there every year and it's a general tag for me as a Wyoming resident. I just go to buy it over the counter. Usually I don't buy it until the day I go down there. And I have for, oh my gosh, at least 15, 20 years. Well, actually, the first year I ever hunted when I was 14, back then you couldn't hunt until you were 14. I hunted in this area. And so I decided this year, now Wyoming Game Fish did a bunch of stuff. They shortened seasons. They cut tag allocations. They've done what they can, or what they feel they should need to be done to manage it. They cut my season from a 14-day season to a 6-day season. I decided if they're cutting it in less than half, I don't need to be down there. I don't need to kill a deer that hopefully survives and breeds a doe in November and has twins next year, because I hope we don't have another bad winter. I've been praying for this for 6 months. And so I don't need to kill a buck that is of breeder age, so that way this deer population has a hope. I don't need to do that. I bought the tag, donated the money back, donated the money to some of these organizations that are getting the word out to other groups, or to everybody. Hey, we still have to manage these. We still have to pay to manage these deer. Donate your $65. Donate it to the Wyoming Game and Fish so that they can still manage this stuff, but they're not having to deal with hunters, taking additional out of that 20% that survived. It was a really bad winter, and hopefully we come back out of this. Now we're doing, we talked about the sage-grouse documentary. We're kind of doing an expose on what the Wyoming Game and Fish did right and what they did wrong. And of course, we have the benefit. I'm the first one to say we have the benefit of being hindsight's 2020, right? And they have a tough job. They're trying to predict what's going to happen months in advance to years in advance, and they're under resourced. I get it. I get it. I'm just telling you, we kind of did an expose and went down this rabbit trail. We found a guy that is worked on the feed grounds, the Wyoming State feed grounds for elk, and has a doctorate in ungulate nutrition. And he claims, and he wrote this letter to the Wyoming State Daily, which is a news organization, digital news organization here. He wrote this letter that said Wyoming should have fed the deer. And of course, everybody in my office saw this and was like, "Wait, what? I thought we couldn't feed deer because they couldn't digest it." Well, he got on the phone with my brother, and my dad's known this guy for 35 years. He wrote a book on it. Actually, he wrote a book on the Wyoming State feed grounds and how feeding animals works. His thesis is that a deer can, if you start early enough, before they change and go purely to browse, that if you start feeding them early enough, and if you feed them the right amount and the right stuff, that after 3 or 4 days, the bacteria in their stomach will switch back, and then they can digest it again. Because one of the problems that deer have, and this happens in some of the Midwest states, these deer will be standing in some guy's corn silage bin or in a hay stack eating hay, and then they keel over dead with a full stomach, die of starvation, because the bacteria in their stomachs isn't the right bacteria to digest that type of food. Their stomachs change throughout the year when it goes from the winter browse into the spring and green grass, and then the grass turns brown, it changes again, and then when the grass is the snow comes, then they change into browse, it changes again. I mean, there's a whole science to this. His thesis is that if we would have started a little earlier, or started and did it early, we wouldn't have had an 80% die off. It would be more in the 30s and 40s tops, which is a huge deal. Now, we're probably going to get strung up about reporting this. This isn't I'm not a biologist. This isn't my science. This is his, but this is what he claims. And I would love to, and I'm hoping during this expose that we get some Wyoming game and fish biologists that tell us why they couldn't do it. And hopefully it wasn't a money thing, because I know there's people that would have donated money, a lot of money, to feed the deer had they known that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can get this out early enough that they can contemplate, if we have another bad winter, they consider doing it and doing it this winter to maintain, or to at least keep some of what we have left.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. And it's one of those things where it's kind of a community effort, because I feel like sometimes the DNR or the DWR, whatever you call it in your state, they're definitely understaffed. That's for sure. And they're trying to do the best that they can with what they have, but bringing in some outside resources, especially in these kind of freak scenarios that they're not used to handling, would probably be, even just having a contact list of, okay, we got a crappy winter. Here's a list of people that, like you said, would be willing to donate. Let's contact them if we need money. Or this guy here, he's got a PhD. He knows what he's doing. We need to go, contact this guy to get some opinions, because we may be qualified in biology, but we're not PhDs. We don't know enough about it to make this decision that he might be able to have another insight on. So things like that, bringing that community together, is definitely a big deal. And I don't think by any means, it would be or come off as extremely negative. And if people can't take feedback on how they performed, then that's a problem to begin with. You should be able to take the good with the bad and realize, hey, yeah, we screwed up, and here's some suggestions. So now we can make a game plan for the next crappy winter that we have, and how we can protect our animals, mainly the mule deer in this situation. So I love that idea of having an expose and bringing in some knowledgeable people, and hopefully you are able to get some Division of Wildlife agents on that they can talk about it, and it's not one of those things that's like, oh, we screwed up, we're not allowed to talk about it kind of deal. So hopefully that goes well.
Yeah, and my intent isn't to. I do not want this to seem. And I told the group that's writing, I said this cannot be beat on the game and fish. It can't be. That's not the point. The point is, hindsight's 2020. How you become successful is you look at your mistakes and you try and do better the next time. That's what this is intended.
Yep.
Also, one criticism I've always had about all game and fish departments, or all division of natural resources, or whatever they call it in your state, they're horrible at disseminating information to the right people. They put a press release out or put it on their website and put it on their social media and go, okay, everybody knows. No, because nobody follows that stuff. Nobody, Joe Finicknick that's working a 12-hour shift is not reading the game and fish's press releases.
No.
But he's reading stuff from companies like me. He's reading stuff from other companies. He's listening to your podcast. He's reading stuff and consuming content. If they could give us the information and help us spread the word of what they need, I guarantee you there's listeners to your podcast, there's listeners to my podcast, and in my audience that would go, oh my gosh, they need money for hay. I'll donate directly to the Game and Fish because I know that's where it's going to go. It's not going to go to some fat cat's private jet to fly to Washington, D.C. to talk to someone. It is going to the DNR or to Game and Fish, and they're actually getting hay and they're actually putting it on the ground. Also, there might be guys that go, I can't donate, but my gosh, once again, 2 Saturdays and a Sunday, I can come out and I can help you break bales open. I have these resources that are at my disposal that I can help with, and just get it done the right way. Because one thing that humans can do, and we do it really well when we're passionate about it and we're informed about it, is we can come together as a team and we can overcome anything. If you don't believe me, look at the space station, look at the moon, look at the internet.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm 100% on board with you. And whoever has taken over the national national parks, is it Twitter or Instagram or whatever? And have you seen those funny things they're putting out there where they're like, when you're, oh man, whoever got a hold of that and they're allowing, it's probably some 20-year-old, but they're actually like it's almost pushing the boundaries of not being politically correct. And it was kind of surprising the first time I saw one. I was like, there's no way this is a spoof. But it was like hitting on these things of like, always hike with someone that's fatter than you because they could be like, it's using those and twisting it to where, yeah, exactly. Yes. It's hitting on things like that. I'll have to send you some of these later, but it's hilarious. But it gets your attention because you're like, wait, hold on a second. Is this really? And you go to their actual website and it's legitimately them. And so if, they've found a way to get eyeballs on their stuff, why couldn't DNR do it? And I guess the answer is they're understaffed and don't know how to work, social media, podcasts and things like that. And all they have to do is get that information to the right people, create a list of email, people they need to email when something new happens, email it out and be like, hey, this is what we want released. This is what's going on. This is the person that we want to get on your podcast or to write an article. I'd be more than happy to have them on personally. I know a lot of people that would.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to sit down and have a conversation of why they didn't do it. And I won't ramrod them. That's not my intent. There's got to be a reason. Hopefully it's not because we were Chicken Little. I guarantee you there's a reason, because they don't do things without. So there's a reason. I'd love to know what it is. And go, okay, do you still feel now that it's hindsight 2020 that was the best decision? Or is there something better next time that we can, is there stopgaps, matrix that we can in place that help us not do this again?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like, well, why could Utah do it? Are Utah deer that different that they can't eat hay? And Wyoming deer, it's like, there's got to be something there. And I'm on board with you. I hope it wasn't money related. Right. I have a feeling that might have played an aspect into it, but I hope not. I really hope not. Yeah. So, and then on top of that, just kind of to wrap things up here, I wanted to ask you about there's a documentary that you mentioned is coming out because your grandfather was going up and recording
Yeah.
wildlife hunts, things like that. And there's something new that's coming out, kind of retracing those steps. So, talk to us about that a little bit. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good point. It was a heck of an adventure. My grandfather in 1961 and 62 he got asked by the Canadian government to go into the Northwest Territories, the Mackenzie Mountains specifically, and film the wildlife. There was a guy named Stan Burrell who was trying to get the Canadian government to allow him to bring in a small amount of hunters per year and hunt the game in there. Before it was completely shut down, so that the natives that lived there, the different tribes, that was their resource, and that was theirs. But Stan came into the government and said, listen, all this money can go back into the natives, the tags and all this stuff can go back in their pool of money. They can get money off this. Plus, I'm going to bring these guys in there, so everybody benefits, and it's not going to affect the resource at all. The Canadian government says, how do you know that? Well, because I've been spending a lot of time up here, and this is what's happening. And so they contacted my grandfather, who had done a fair amount of filming in Alaska, and he would film these hunts and stuff and then bring them back down to the US, and he would live narrate them because there was no audio. He'd live
Well,
narrate.
I'm just going to pause you there real quick because filming back then was a lot different, and I
Yes.
don't think people understand. Like, I remember my dad, and I'm only 31, so my dad's like 50 or something like that, and he would carry around a camera to record us as kids. I can only imagine another generation back, the technology you had to take and how many batteries and all this other stuff that you had to get up there into the wilderness of Alaska and the Northwest Territories, which is even more, I guess, undiscovered than Alaska, or right up there. Carrying all that in, I can't imagine.
Yeah, they had two sets of camera equipment, 80 pounds. That just the camera equipment was 80 pounds each. That's before your tents, your sleeping bags, your food, your rifle, your binoculars, all the other stuff you needed to survive.
Good backpacks.
Yeah, they were using Army surplus. No kidding. They were using Army surplus backpacks, wooden frame backpacks, with little, cheap straps that are as wide as your belt, and just made out of whatever. And they did it for. It's not like they went up there for a couple of weeks. They went up there for 90 days. They lived off the land, and they were able to harvest what they needed to eat, and they did it the right way. But they're tough, and so he did this in 1961, 62. And it was a really, really amazing story. On the film was called my grandfather's film was called Challenging the Northwest Territories. And on this film, there's a guy named Cougar Long who builds this cabin in this huge meadow with a lake called Canal Lake. I didn't know that until we decided to till the end of this adventure. So Yeti came to us and said they had watched. We did a film. I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and my dad actually went to. These guys were dying off. My grandfather went up there with two of his best friends. My grandfather passed away in 96, and one other guy's name was Stan Burrell, or I'm sorry, Stan Burrell was the outfitter. The other guy's name was Eddie. Oh my gosh, I had it might just escape my mind. Anyway, Eddie, and then the other guy's name was Danny Gibbers. So my dad went to Washington where these guys lived, and he interviewed them, in 2006. So whatever, do the math, almost 50 years later, interviewed them about this story. And we had this footage. And so we put together a YouTube video about that. And we worked in the Challenging Northwest Territories. It was kind of a retro look back at this type thing. Well, Yeti had seen it, and they had the head of their marketing right at the time when they really blew up. Corey Maynard was his name. he came to us and said, I want to take you guys I want to take one of you or your brother on a sheep hunt back to the Northwest Territories, and we're just going to retrace this and just see how much it's changed. And they really thought they're going to go in there and it was going to be completely different. There was, there's towns and all kinds of stuff. I was like, okay, but they came to us in February and they wanted to go that July. Well, these sheep outfitters are booked out 2-3 years. You don't just get on a sheep hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just so happened that one of the guys, Stan Simpson, sold his hunting concession back to the natives, and then the natives got this gal from northern British Columbia to run it for him. Glenda, she'd been running hunts for a long time, and they got her to run the camp. And I just happened to know a couple guys, Dustin Rowe and Rachel Attila, and we were at the Safari Club actually, and bumped into him. I said, "Hey, I'm looking for a sheep hunt. Do you know anybody that has had a cancellation or anything that's in the Mackenzies? I'm hoping to get back to the place that was iconic that my grandfather did. It was called the Plains of Abraham, and it's this giant plateau at the top. You look across and you look across the edge and you can just see the peaks of the Mackenzie, and it's this huge 90 by 90 square mile plateau. And so anyway, I bumped in and they're like, actually, Glenda has a couple hunts open. Let's go talk to her. So the next day we bump into her and she's like, yeah, absolutely. I could do a sheep hunt, but you have to take 2 caribou hunts. I'm like, oh gosh, okay, that'll be horrible. I guess I'll shoot a mountain caribou.
Darn.
And so we started down this road, and it had to be one of the first hunts. So we went in July, and at the end of July, the beginning of August, and it was typical, North Country. We got stuck in Norman Wells for 3 days, and while we were there, we go into this little tiny museum, and the little curator's there, talking to us, and I walk around the corner, and on the wall is 5 photos of my grandfather and his sheep from that experience. And she's like, do you know him? I go, yeah, this is the whole reason we're here. And we flip it over, and my grandfather signed the back of it, the back of the photo. And we kind of told her, and she was astonished that she had no idea who they were or what it was. It was just old time footage in photos of Northwest Territories. So anyway, we fly into our camp and get off this Twin Otter in this lake, and we take all our stuff up to these little huts and tents and stuff. And there's one building in the middle of this camp. And I walk over, and on the wall of this log cabin, on the outside of the wall, is a plaque, and it says D.W. Long, 1961. And that cabin was the exact cabin that my grandfather filmed being built in 1961. And we're here in 2018, I think, or 17, whatever years, 50 some years later, and it's still there. They're still using it as a cook shack. And in the challenging Northwest Territories, my grandfather, as they're building this cabin, he finds this big sheep on a mountain right on the other side of the creek from the cabin. And he goes up and walks the sheep down and shoots him. Well, we hunted 4 days and couldn't find a good ram, and come back to the main camp. And sure enough, one morning, Glenda's dad, who was around forever, looks up there on his spot and scope, and of course, the nights are really short there. Days are really long. He goes, there's a band of sheep up there. And we look, I was like, oh my gosh, that's the same mountain that my grandfather shot his on. That's so awesome. We haul all the way up there and spend the better part of 24 hours getting to the top. And we're able to, my brother, who has the sheep bug, I don't have the sheep bug, he does. And he was able to shoot his ram on the same mountain that my grandfather did. It was unbelievable. So Yeti did this as a film, and it was really, really well done, knowing that their audience is very broad. They don't show the kill scene. You see guys shoot, but you don't actually see the impact. You see the ram dead. But they did it really, really well. These 2 guys out of Colorado, Travis and Ben, we almost killed them a couple times on a rock slide thing. And they were like, what did we get ourselves into? I'm like, this is just hunting, man. Yep. But it was good. And so they released it. They actually released it today. So around the 1st of September, they released it, and it's going gangbusters, and people are, they're having, I read one comment this morning. He goes, I am not an emotional man. That really tugged on me. He goes, that really tugged on our history and on, looking back at my own family and my own family's tradition and how we've been hunting the same property for years. And, it's just a tradition. It's a family tradition. Everybody has them. We're just blessed enough that my grandfather documented it back then.
Mm-hmm. No, that's amazing. That's really cool. And I'll definitely have to leave that link down here as well in the description, because I'm going to have to go watch it. That's pretty cool.
It's
And
it's
I
on
definitely,
it's
go ahead.
on Yeti's YouTube. It's called Grandpa Gordon. It's on Yeti.
Okay.
Yeti Presents, and the film's called Grandpa Gordon.
Awesome. Awesome. No, that's really cool. And it's awesome that you were able to go up there and retrace those steps. And obviously you've got nicer gear now. But
Yeah, we didn't have 80 pounds of camera equipment, and my sleeping bag was really warm, and sitting in the rain wasn't that
your
big
boots.
a deal. Yeah, boots.
I mean, think
Oh my
about
gosh.
boots. My goodness. Like some of the stuff that I'm like, I go across it and I worry about the tread on my boots, which I mean, they're Crispies and it's the very nice
Yep.
Vibram sole, good grip. And then I think I'm like, man, some of these guys wore boots that were as slick as my church shoes or cowboy boots
Yeah.
climbing up this. What is wrong with me? Like,
That's right. That's 100% right.
yeah, it's crazy to think, but no, that's amazing, man. It's cool that you got to have that experience and go relive some of what your grandpa did. So that is really cool. Is there anything that we haven't touched on here that maybe you want to bring up to the audience?
Yeah, the other thing that's happened this year is we launched what we're calling Tag Hub 2.0, and what that is it's our research tool for hunting out west and tag draws, allocations, how many points it takes to draw every state, all the big game species. And we finally were able to overlay it with 3D maps. We partnered with a company called Spartan Forge to do this, and you can dump if you're doing your online research on your computer and you dump a waypoint, we're the first ones that waypoint pops up on your mobile device, and it populates with Tag Hub overlay maps, all that. Also the first two that this research tool not only overlays on your desktop mapping, but it also does it inside your mobile app. So when you're out there driving down the highway and go, geez, man, I see a ton of antelope here, and you can pop it open and say, oh, this is area blah blah blah, here's the draw odds, here's application process, all of that stuff. So we just dropped that, and there's a subscription base for that. You can get Spartan Forge upgrade to allow you to do all kinds of cool things. Spartan Forge is free, but the Eastman's Tag Hub portion, I think it's $10 a year or something like that. That allows you to dump that over the top of it.
That's pretty cool. That's awesome. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. With it, so the Tag Hub 2.0, that's pretty cool. So
yeah,
definitely recommend people check that out if they're looking at building out eventual hunts, things down the line that they want to get into. And I think it's cool that you're interacting with Spartan Forge. They're a really awesome group as well, and I love their the stuff that they provide on their app and the maps and the way that they go about it as well. I know a lot of Midwest and Eastern hunters really like it, and I've kind of messed around with it for Western hunting as well, and it works really well. So definitely recommend that. Well, that's awesome, Ike. And again, I appreciate your time today. I appreciate all the information that you've shared. I think it's really valuable, and I know people will get at least one thing, if not multiple little golden nuggets out of this conversation. So is there anything you want to leave with the audience here as we wrap up?
No, I just appreciate what you're doing, and appreciate you communicating with guys and helping them become better hunters. I watched a bunch of your gear reviews, and you do a really good job of politely saying this isn't as good as it could be.
Yeah.
But you also do a really good job at promoting what is good and why it's good. I watched your Evolution Outdoors one, and I watched a couple of the Digiscoping one was pretty funny. MagView's the one that we used. I haven't got Ollin. I have not messed with that one yet. But yeah, I think that guys get a benefit out of that, and I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I try and keep it the same way that I talk to people. My buddies always say I'm the most expensive friend they have. I'm like, you don't pay me anything. And they're like, well, when you get passionate about something, we want to buy it too.
Like pretty soon, all of a sudden,
yeah,
I have everything you've been talking about.
it's weird how that works.
It is.
But no, I appreciate it, man. And thanks again for your time. I know you've got a lot going on, and I love everything that you guys are putting
Yeah.
out there and constantly trying to improve. And like you said, you pivot with what you recognize you guys need to with marketing and et cetera to get the information out to people. So
Yep.
definitely appreciate that. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. And again, I appreciate Ike being on. And you guys go check out the links down below for all the videos. Check out Eastman's, their tag hub, and everything else that we've talked about today. And then more than anything, get involved in conservation in your area and even across state lines. If you go hunt a different state, buy a bear tag, buy a wolf tag, even if you're not planning on hunting them, donate, like what Ike was saying, to that community that you're going in and taking from their resources as you leave your own state. And just be a good conservationist while you're being a hunter as well, and be a good person. But again, Ike, thank you so much. And as I always say, guys, get out, live your life, and love it.